The New York Giants lost to the Dallas Cowboys in a crazy 40 to 37 overtime game on Sunday. Wild game where we saw lots and lots of lead changes, incredible plays by the Giants offense, weird stuff from James Hudson on the opening drive of the game. 26 accepted penalties, I think, during the game by both sides. Just one of the craziest regular season games you'll ever see. And here to help me make sense of it all in our Monday morning Giants fall to 0-2 therapy session is Big Blue Views Tony DelGenio. Morning, Tony. How are you?
I'm okay, all things considered.
So, is your head still spinning from what we saw yesterday? And do you feel any differently about what you saw, after getting a night's sleep, versus what you did when the game ended?
You're assuming I was able to sleep, but
Well, I would hope you were able to sleep. I was able to
I
sleep.
I slept like a baby. Um, so the Giants are 0-2, just like the other dregs of the NFL, like the Kansas City Chiefs. They're 0-2. Yeah. To be honest, to be perfectly honest, okay, aside from the fact that it was a game that they should have won and could have won and blew with a couple of ill-timed plays. I I was actually thrilled with yesterday's game, certainly on the offensive side. And I'm Russell Wilson never should have thrown that last moon ball, obviously, but yeah, he had a great game for them yesterday, and all the questions in week one about whether he's done and is Russ cooked and all of that stuff. I mean, he answered those with an exclamation point yesterday. The guy can still throw the ball. The Giants have wide receivers who can catch the ball, and so the potential is there for something really good on offense, with one big exception that I'm sure we'll get to talking about, and that's the red zone. My big concern with the Giants is the defense, which is not looking to me any better than it has in recent times. Uh, and of course, coming on the heels of a very aggressive defensive coordinator in Wink Martindale, the Giants' defense now is just so much more kind of unsettling to watch, and I worry that that's more their problem than anything right now.
Yeah, Tony, we'll get fully into both the offense and the defense here in a little bit, but I did a quick reaction show on YouTube last night, and I have the same general reaction that you do. I have a really hard time being angry about what we saw on Sunday. I mean, 450 yards passing from Russell Wilson, great games from Malik Neighbors and Wandale Robinson, back and forth, up and down the field kind of affair, like we haven't seen, from in a Giants game in a long time. I think that this was the most prolific passing game by a Giants quarterback since a game by Eli Manning in 2013, which I think also happened to be against Dallas when Manning threw for 450 yards, or at least one of the most prolific games. I think this tied Manning for fourth in yards, yards passing in a Giants game in franchise history. I just have a hard time being angry because of all of the things that we saw, all those penalties, the weirdness from James Hudson. Yeah, we can talk about the soft defense from Shane Bowen at the end of the game. But This took a 64-yard field goal from Brandon Aubrey, a 64-yard field goal. It wasn't that long ago, Tony, that 64-yard field goals were unheard of. Now they're commonplace. I think that kick from Brandon Aubrey probably would have been good from 70. And that's just ridiculous. I mean, I had the thought at one point in overtime, I think the Cowboys punted when they could have tried a 76-yard field goal. And the thing of it was, I wouldn't have thought they would have been insane to try it. I would have thought they had a 50-50 shot to make it. That's just how incredible Brandon Aubrey is. But considering, yes, the Giants are 0-2. Yes, they lost a game they could have won. But considering what we've seen from the Giants for the last 2 years and some of the awful, awful football we've seen over the last 10 or 12 years, I just had a really difficult time being angry about what we saw on Sunday.
Yeah, that's how I feel. I was obviously very disappointed in that last minute of regulation to see what they did to come back. Was an amazing thing. And and then I mean in 19 seconds they get into position for Aubrey to kick the field goal. And as you say, I mean when I was a kid, if you kicked a 48-yard field goal, that was considered amazing. I mean, one of the big plays in Giants history was when Pat Summerall beat the Browns in I guess it was a conference playoff game to get them to the championship game. And yeah, it was snowing, but I think that was like a 49-yard field goal, and it was considered an amazing thing at that time. Now you have Brandon Aubrey hitting for 67, and as you say, it looked like he could have easily made it from 70. And so that's just the luck of the draw that you happen to be playing a team with a kicker that good. And he's, I think, he's arguably the best kicker in the NFL now. I mean, you used to think that about Justin Tucker, but Justin Tucker, I think, is not the player he used to be. Never mind his other problems. And Aubrey is just an amazing kicker. So, what can you do? I mean, I would have liked to see them play tighter defense. So did Greg Olson think that. And if Greg Olson thought they should be playing tighter, shallower defense, then I'm on board, because I think Greg Olson knows a lot more than I do about the game. So,
absolutely, Tony. I guess that while we're on the subject, we seem to be leaning more toward talking about the defense at this point. I guess that's where we should start. We'll start mostly with the defensive side of the ball. And I wrote a column this morning on Shane Bowen, on the Giants defense. Big, all sorts of big offseason acquisitions. Lots of, Abdul Carter, adding Javon Holland, adding Paulson Adebo, adding Darius Alexander in the third round of the draft, Roy Robertson Harris. Lots of expectations, even, from myself and from Big Blue View in general, that this would be a top 10 defense potentially. And of course, expectations potential means nothing. The Giants are, at this point, I think, last in the league through 2 games in yards allowed, 27th or 28th in points allowed. It just hasn't been good enough. I'm a little bit reminded of, if you want to spin it positively, I think about 2007 when the Giants defense was awful in the first 2 games, and then made the big goal line stand in week 3 against Washington, and then went on to be, a game-wrecking defense that was a big part of the reason that they won the Super Bowl that year. But I just don't know that I have the same level of confidence in Shane Bowen to pull this together. Not that Shane Bowen is a horrible defensive coordinator. I just don't know. So, I mean, at this point, the Giants have to win games on defense. That's all there is to it. They had 3 fourth quarter leads on Sunday that they gave back by giving up long touchdown drives. They had a 10-point lead in the first half that they gave back by giving up 2 long touchdown drives. So very, very disappointing. Just any thoughts that you have on Bowen, on what we've seen from the defense so far?
Yeah, and I think the thing is the contrast, right? After Wink Martindale, right? And not that I'm saying I think they should be blitzing all the time, because I think blitzing is overrated as a defensive strategy. It's something you pull out of your pocket every now and then to surprise the opposing offense, but you don't doing it as much as Wink did it. I think you reached a point of diminishing returns. But what Wink Martindale was good at was making sure that when the game was on the line, he got pressure on the quarterback. And if you think about that Giants 2022 season, when so many things seemed to go right for them, at the end of that Baltimore game, that was a game that I thought the Giants had no business winning, beating that Lamar Jackson team. And at the end of the game, what were they doing? They were getting pressure on Lamar Jackson, right, and making life uncomfortable for him. And then the week before in London, when they beat Green Bay, they were getting pressure on Aaron Rodgers at the end, and making him uncomfortable. And I feel like now, if the Giants get pressure on an opposing quarterback, it's more the kind of the individual efforts of the players rather than something clever that's being dialed up by Shane Bowen. You don't have to have that type of aggressive defense. So the Eagles don't really play, in my mind, I could be wrong about this, an aggressive defense, but they play a lot of too deep zone type defenses. But what they do is confuse the opposing quarterback with their different looks, and that's another way of doing things, right? And I don't see either of those things coming from what the Giants are doing. I feel like quarterbacks look at the Giants defense and they know what they want to do right away. And I don't see them back there looking around, being confused and things like that, right? And so I think you've either got to be aggressive or you've got to be clever to fool the offense into going someplace where they shouldn't go. And I'm not really seeing any of those. I'm seeing quarterbacks look very comfortable against the Giants defense. And they've got more talent this year, right? So they've got Javon Holland, they've got Paulson Adebo. They've got everyone back healthy, although I'm wondering how healthy Dexter Lawrence still is, because Dexter Lawrence in the first 2 weeks hasn't had a real Dexter Lawrence wreck the game type of performance. But that after yesterday, these are my biggest concerns about the Giants. There's one other that we can get to on the offensive side of the ball, but I just worry that the defense, despite the talent, is not playing as a whole like a defense with that much talent should play.
Absolutely. The 64-yard kick in overtime. I'm watching the game on TV like you were, and Greg Olson on the Fox broadcast he pointed out before the snap how deep the Giants were playing. And in retrospect, when I think about it, I understand that you don't want to get beaten over the top. You don't want to get beaten over the top and lose the football game right there in the last 10 seconds. But, Brian Daboll said, we understood what kind of a kicker Brandon Aubrey was. We understood we had to play some tighter coverage. We understood all of that. They didn't do it on that play. They basically, if you want to criticize Shane Bowen for one play in particular, I think you have to criticize him there, for the simple reason that they gifted Dallas the opportunity to try that, mid 60-yard field goal attempt, which, if it had been 67 yards, which it would have been had they not gained the 3 yards rushing on the next play, he's still going to make that kick. So they gifted Dallas that opportunity. And yet, this is, for me, this is not all on Shane Bowen. Look at the number of penalties the Giants committed. So many penalties. 2 roughing the passer penalties on Roy Robertson Harris. And yes, we can argue that the second one was a bad call, which I think it was, because Robertson Harris was clearly off to the side of Dak Prescott on that play. So that's a bad call. But so many defensive pass interferences, roughing penalties, issues in coverage there were 2 situations where Deonte Banks and Bobby Okereke had CeeDee Lamb bracketed in coverage, and it looked to my untrained eye like Okereke just didn't get deep enough to prevent those throws. But just so many issues. It can't all be Shane Bowen, but it is disappointing, for the talent level that the Giants have on defense, for them to be playing that way. And they have to play better than that if they're going to win football games. This is a football game that the Giants offense, handed them opportunity after opportunity to put away, and they just didn't do it. As for Bowen, he's not getting fired midseason. Who's going to take over? Who's going to take that job? Nobody's going to come in and completely change the defensive scheme. Who do they have on staff who could be elevated to that job? Maybe Andre Patterson, who's been a co-defensive coordinator before, but I just don't see it. But the Giants have to be better on defense if they're going to win football games.
Yeah, and you alluded to the 2007 season. Not that I think this team is anything like the 2007 Giants, but the 2007 Giants are a good lesson in the sense that, as you alluded to, they lost their first 2 games and almost lost their third game, were it not for that goal line stand against Washington at the end of the third game. But if I remember correctly, one of those 2 opening losses was a shellacking by Dallas. I'd have to go back and look it up, but I think one of those games was a game where they gave up 30 some odd points to Dallas and only scored, I don't know, 13 or something like that themselves, if I remember correctly. So, and we remember the 2009 Giants as being one of the great Giants defensive teams of all time, and so they still started off that season playing very poorly. I don't think this team is capable of that type of thing, but I don't think after 2 games you have to make wholesale changes. And as you say, you can't make wholesale changes really at this point. Anyway, I do think most of us thought when the schedule was first announced that the Giants would be 0-2 after 2 games, right? And everybody looked at the schedule and said, "Oh, God, you have to play all these games at the beginning of the season against tough opponents." And Dallas is not the team that they used to be, but they're not a bad team either. They're obviously an extremely dangerous team offensively, and they still have talent on defense. They just don't have talent across the board on defense the way they used to have. And so, 0-2 is no surprise to me. I'll be very interested to see how they respond against Kansas City next week, because it's really kind of a fascinating setup for a game with a Giants team that played so spectacularly on offense and still couldn't put the game away, and a Kansas City team that is not at all used to being 0-2. And frankly, Kansas City to me looks like a team on the decline. They've had injuries to key players. I think they haven't drafted particularly well in recent years, and I feel like Travis Kelsey's getting old. I feel like Patrick Mahomes is just kind of like running around trying to save that team almost on his own now, and if anyone can do it, he can. But Kansas City is a beatable team at this point in time, so it's actually kind of a fascinating uh, team for them to be playing at this moment. Not that I expect them to win, but anyway, I'm disappointed in what happened yesterday, but there were lots of positive signs.
Absolutely, Tony. Just to clean up one thing here, in that 2007 season, those two opening losses, the Giants gave up 45 points to the Cowboys and then 35 to the Packers. So 80 points in their first two games.
Right.
So yeah, and as you said, this is not a Super Bowl team, but it's just an indication or just something to remember that just because the first two games were not good doesn't mean that this can't be the defense that people are expecting. But for me, a lot of that has to be, on the players. And it's also interesting to me, you said nobody's surprised that they're 0-2, and I'm not surprised either. And and I know that I actually picked the Giants to win week 1 and picked them to lose week 2. But had you gone back to the preseason and all of that, I would have thought that this game was the one that out of the first two that the Giants probably had the best chance to win. If they were going to be 1-1 heading into games against Kansas City and the Chargers, this was the game I thought they really needed to win. That Dallas defense without Micah Parsons, with so many cornerbacks, including Deron Bland being injured, that defense was incredibly vulnerable, and the Giants did, for the most part, take advantage of it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's going to be, as you said, it's going to be so interesting to see them play the Chiefs on Sunday night, because that's just not the Chiefs that we think of. That's not the Super Bowl winning Chiefs, at least not the way they're playing right now, and not with the roster that they appear to have. But Tony, let's talk about the offense. Let's talk about Russell Wilson. The narrative all of last week, including in a post that I wrote Sunday morning, was if we saw the same terrible, lifeless offense, that we saw against the Commanders, that Jackson Dart, they turned things over to Jackson Dart at some point on Sunday, and that would be the end of it for Russell Wilson. Well, that's not going to happen now. That's as good as Russell Wilson in regulation. That's as good as Russell Wilson can be. Long passes, 450 yards total. Three long touchdown passes, including one on 4th and 4 to Wan'Dale Robinson. I don't know about you, but credit again to Russ, because I didn't see that kind of game coming. I didn't know if Russell Wilson had that in him, but I think Russell Wilson bought himself at least several more starts.
Oh, absolutely. I think the big difference yesterday compared to the first game was that he got better protection. It wasn't perfect pass protection, but he got enough protection to actually throw the deep ball. I mean, he in the first game, I think he only attempted one pass beyond 20 yards in the entire game against
Absolutely.
and and yesterday I didn't look up how many passes beyond 20 yards he tried, but maybe it was half a dozen of them. And calling them beyond 20 yards is not giving them justice. I mean, he was throwing them beyond 30 yards, maybe beyond 40 yards, right? I mean, he was the cartoon caricature version of Russell Wilson. Okay, everybody says, "Oh, Russell Wilson moonball." Well, the moonballs. It was a full moon yesterday. Okay, because
Absolutely.
I mean,
Yes, it was.
really flinging it downfield. And actually, the most amazing thing about it, I mean, forget Malik Neighbors. I mean, who now kind of routinely makes great catches downfield for the Giants, so much that you just become used to it and you're surprised when he doesn't. But hitting these long ones to Wandale Robinson, and they've been talking for a while now about the fact that Wandale Robinson can be more than just a possession receiver, under in the flat underneath and stuff like that. And at Kentucky, indeed, Levis did Will Levis did pass deeper to Wandale Robinson when they were in college at Kentucky. But frankly, at his size, I really didn't think that was a realistic thing to expect out of him. And yesterday, he proved otherwise. So the good thing about that, if they can be smart about it, is having put on tape that they can get the ball downfield to more than one receiver and throw in Darius Slayton, who isn't getting much attention in this offense, but he had that one deep ball that he caught and had yards after catch on too. They're kind of showing that they've got three guys then that can go deep, and if they can take advantage of that by having defenses play a little softer on them and opening up the intermediate areas of the field, and Russell Wilson is willing to throw to the intermediate areas of the field, not just the really deep balls, that could make them a much harder offense to deal with going down the line. So that much, I think, is a great sign for the Giants. And there's the other side of that we can get to, but I just wanted to make that comment first.
Sure. And I wanted to point out the one thing that you mentioned, and we'll get to James Hudson a little bit later, but let's give some props to this offensive line. I mean, the offensive line, much discussed, much criticized, all of that. This offensive line, after the James Hudson fiasco, that, as I said, we'll get to later, this offensive line played really well. Russell Wilson, I think, was sacked 3 times in 45 dropbacks. He was only hit a few other times. He had a pocket to throw from to make all of the deep shots. Marcus Bowe, rookie tackle, 5th round pick. I don't know where they're going to end up playing him long term. If Andrew Thomas comes back, it's not going to be at left tackle. Jermaine Illuminor is a really good right tackle. I think if you want to get Marcus Bowe on the field, you move him to guard, and you at least initially, at least at some point this year, and you get him in the lineup in place of Greg Van Roten. But the line was good. I mean, it doesn't generate massive push in the run game, but this line did its job on Sunday. Give those guys some props. As you said, give Wandale Robinson all kinds of props. You do still have to hit him you have to drop the ball in the bucket to hit him deep, but Russell Wilson has proven capable of doing that. Just so much to feel good about on the offensive side of the ball. And we've seen one-offs with the offense, like last year when they scored 45 points against Indianapolis and Drew Lock had a great game. We've seen one-offs, but if the Giants can put together some semblance of this kind of offense, for the remainder of the season, then and I don't expect Russell Wilson to throw for 450 yards every week, but we do see what it can look like with better quarterback play, which is what the Giants said last year, which is what they said all off season. So, so from that perspective, it's just, you watch what they did on offense and it's just hard to be angry. Disappointed, yes, but it's hard to be angry.
Yeah, and I don't expect them to do that next week, because I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think the strength of the Kansas City defense now is their defense. Kansas City Chiefs is now their defense actually, and of course Steve Spagnuolo is a really clever defensive coordinator, as Giants fans uh, remember. And I really think the hardest thing about playing Kansas City at the moment or one of the hardest things is that they're not all that easy to move the ball against. Uh, of course, on offense, they still have Mahomes, and what can you say about Mahomes? The problem is Mahomes just does not have the supporting cast right now, partly due to injuries, partly due to bad drafting and signing. But Mahomes is kind of trying to win these games by himself on offense now. So the only thing I will say about the Giants offense is that they're just not very effective in the red zone. And then they've got an entire offensive line out there right now who are not good run blockers. And so every time they get inside the 20, you see them scrambling to get a couple of yards here, a couple of yards there. They're running trick plays, near the goal line, like they tried last week, passing the ball to Bo and stuff like that. And that to me is the weakness of the offense right now, is that they don't have any offensive linemen who are just these kind of big hulking road grading types of run blockers. And that, I think, is what's going to limit them from scoring points more than anything else this season, because they've now put on tape that they can move the ball through the air. Uh, and maybe their offensive strategy has to be, once you get to the 30-yard line, just take shots at the end zone. Don't even try to get into the red zone, because you're going to wind up stalling and having to kick a field goal because the run game isn't effective.
That is one way to work around red zone weakness. And Tony, the Giants are 1 of 7 in red zone opportunities. They've and that's purely in scoring touchdowns. 1 of 7, 14%. Only one team in the league, has failed in all of its red zone opportunities so far this season. So it has to get better, but you're 100% right. You get to the 30, take a shot. Figure out a way to take a shot. Run an option, run a halfback option pass from there. Do something different from there, rather than do it at the 1-yard line. But but they do have to figure it out, because you do have to run the football in the red zone. I mean, it's so tight down there. It's the passing windows are incredibly tight, and you have to be able to run the ball. Otherwise, your defense is just going to pin its ears back, get after the quarterback. And you're always going to be, if you throw an incomplete pass on 1st and 10, from the 12, you're in 2nd and 10. And then you're in a long yardage situation. And I know when you start talking about road grading offensive linemen, people are going to think about Evan Neal. But and I don't know if it's time to give up on Evan Neal. Evan Neal is still a 6'6" or 7", 350-ish pound guy. And if he does have a strength, it would be that road grading in a phone booth, short yardage type situation. He's been inactive for 2 games. The Giants moved him to guard. He's been inactive for 2 games. I don't know if that's going to get better. I don't know if that indicates that the Giants will say they haven't given up on him, but they could not have been impressed by what they saw in the preseason if he's not even getting a uniform on Sunday. So, but they have to figure something out. They have to figure out a way to be better in the red zone, because as much as we want to criticize the defense, the Giants got into the red zone on their first 2 possessions Sunday. And by the way, that first possession, the James Hudson Memorial possession, do you realize that on offense, they had the ball for 16 plays. They were actually credited with gaining 110 yards of offense on that drive. 110 yards of offense over 9 minutes. They lost 50 of those yards due to penalties and ended up with a field goal.
So
But
I did not realize that.
110 yards of offense they were credited with on that opening drive, once before you take away the penalty yardage. It's crazy. But they were up 6-0 when they easily could have been up 14-0. And if they're up 14-0, the end of the game probably doesn't happen that way.
Yeah, definitely. And and the thing is, I mean, I don't think the Giants have a running back on the roster who is a threat to be a Pro Bowl player, but Tyrone Tracy is a nice running back, and he's got great change of direction. He's elusive. Cam Scattaboo is so entertaining to watch. A completely different kind of back. But these guys are getting hit immediately. I looked up yesterday after the game, and I think this was for the second week in a row, but certainly it was true yesterday. Tyrone Tracy had more yards after contact rushing than he had yards. He had like 17 yards after contact, but only 15 yards rushing for the game, which is telling you that he's getting hit before he even makes it to the line of scrimmage. And if that's and that happened last week too against Washington with the running backs. So if you're always getting hit before you even reach the line of scrimmage, you cannot have an effective running game, and you're just not seeing holes open up. And it's a long way to the next draft, but I really hope that Joe Shane or whoever is the Giants GM next season, looks for a guard especially who can be capable in pass protection, but is a real beast when it comes to opening up holes in the running game. Because I feel like if the Giants are a one-dimensional offense at this point, and so I'm thrilled at what Russell Wilson was able to do yesterday, and I'm thrilled that he's got receivers he can do it with. But when you don't have the threat of beating teams with the run, you just can't be a complete offense, and against a good defense, you're gonna find yourself stymied. So I don't know what their solution is to that. I don't as you say, Evan Neal is a really good run blocker. He was last season when he got to play. But the guy's got to show some basic capability in pass protection, or else he's never going to see the field.
Absolutely not. And I think last week, I looked it up at one point. I think last week the Giants had 30 rushing yards. And I think, total without Russell Wilson's runs against Washington, I think they had maybe 12 yards before contact. And, and that's just it can't continue that way. Maybe they need to try some misdirection. Maybe they need to open up, maybe they need to, I don't know what they need to do. There's options, but I don't know that they have any good ones. As I said, maybe we'll see some Marcus Bowe at guard before the season ends, but I don't know that that's an answer either in terms of the run blocking. But as you said, it's just one-dimensional. It does leave you with issues, especially in the red zone. Tony, we have got to talk about James Hudson. We just have to. I mean, look, you and I have been watching football for a very long time. And, there's our friend James taking a swipe at a Cowboys defender's helmet, doing the old Deacon Jones move that was banned, 40 years ago. But I have never in my life seen anything like that. A holding penalty followed by, I think, 4 penalties in 5 or 6 plays, 2 offside penalties, 2 15-yard unnecessary roughness, unsportsmanlike conduct penalties. I've never seen anything like that, in my life. And then for him to go ballistic on the sideline was just, it was entertaining, but ridiculous. Thank goodness that the Giants got him out of the game and went to Bo.
Yeah, yeah, I've never seen anything like that in all my years of watching football. Um, I mean, it's interesting, to ask the question, what happens to him, and going forward, I, I find it hard to think that they would start him next. Let's assume just for the sake of argument that Andrew Thomas isn't ready yet, and we don't really have any indication that he's close to being ready. I mean, they keep on waiting and waiting until the end of the week before they announce that he's not going to be active. And I don't know, maybe next week he finally will be. But let's just assume that he's out for another week. I think Marcus Bo played well enough that you can certainly justify starting him in place of Hudson. I don't think it would be a good look for Brian Daboll to start Hudson after what he did yesterday. I think there have to be some bigger repercussions of that behavior than just putting him back in the starting lineup next week. I don't know that you cut him, as Mark Thompson is asking in the comments. They don't have a lot of depth. I don't know if they can afford to do that. It will also cost them some money if they do cut him. I think I looked up that if you cut him now, there would be something like $2 million in dead money or something like that to do that. And so, is it worth it to do that? But mainly from a depth standpoint, until Andrew Thomas is back, I don't think you actually want to make any roster move. Once Andrew Thomas does come back, then it's a legitimate question as to whether you want to keep him on the roster or not. But for next week, I think I'll be kind of surprised if they don't start Marcus Bo next week, because I thought Bo looked, I don't want to say he looked great, but he certainly looked capable out there of playing. And so I think that's probably going to be the short-term solution, but who knows? I don't know what's going on. And maybe they'll surprise us, and Andrew Thomas will be ready to play next week, and we'll see. But it's kind of a troubling thing, because they're not they're not a deep team on the offensive line to begin with. They have a bunch of parts who are kind of adequate. All right. And other than Andrew Thomas and to some extent Jermaine Illuminor, they don't have many really good offensive linemen sitting there. And so maybe you decide that Marcus Bo is just your guy going forward until Andrew Thomas is really ready.
Tony, I almost think that you have to. You can't put James Hudson out there again. You're looking at a situation where Hudson did what he did, and he had his meltdown and 4 penalties, and the Giants had 14 overall penalties, which the Giants had a defensive series where they had 6 penalties on one drive. Obviously 3 penalties on one play that all got offset, but still 6 penalties on one drive. Just crazy. And if you're Brian Daboll and you put James Hudson back in the lineup, you are more or less saying to your football team, well, we're going to talk about being disciplined, but playing like that's okay. You're more or less just giving them the message that there's no accountability, that they can do what they want, that that it doesn't matter, that we're just not going to deal with those penalties and all of that. You cannot play James Hudson. Now, he does have a 2-year contract, $6 million guaranteed. If the Giants were to cut him today, they take a $3.7 million cap hit. And to be honest with you, I don't know that they will, but I certainly could justify cutting him today, just for the simple reason that that at some point you have to send the message that we have to be better than that. We have to be more disciplined. We have to stop committing all of these dumb penalties, the unnecessary roughness penalties after the whistle on Drew Phillips, that kind of stuff just can't happen. And then you get the defensive pass interference penalties, which half the time is just poor technique by the defensive back, which again, they need to be better. They know the rules. They need to be better. So I don't know. To me, maybe the 3.7 million is worth it to send that message to the rest of the football team. The problem is, beyond Marcus Bowe, there are no tackles on the practice squad. And who's out there that you're going to pick up? You're counting on, and you've moved Evan Neal off tackle, so that's not really an option. So you don't have a whole lot of options, but I certainly couldn't blame the Giants if they moved on from James Hudson today. Just one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would do if I were Brian Daboll is you don't cut him. You do bench him for next week and explain.
Make him inactive. Make
right,
him
right,
inactive.
Yeah, and that's the consequence of what you did during the game. The thing about Hudson is that he did stuff like this in camp too, and so it's not like this just came out of the blue. He's kind of got a reputation for this type of thing, and so I think you just have to have a good talk with him and say, this is what we're going to do next week. We're going to give you another chance after that, and whether we'll start you again, that remains to be seen. But we'll give you another chance to play, and obviously some of this depends on when Andrew Thomas is ready to play. But I would argue you don't cut him yet, but you make it clear to him that the next infraction, he's gone, and see whether he can behave himself, and you go from there, because they're not a really deep team on the offensive line. It's not like they've got future Pro Bowlers waiting to get onto the field. So, and you want to see what Bo can do. I mean, I think Bo was encouraging yesterday, and for purely football reasons, it's worth it to get a long extended look at Bo and see where he is in his development. As Mark indicated, Bo was considered a third round talent, but he has these short arms, and it was thought that he couldn't necessarily play tackle in the NFL, and that he'd have to move inside to guard. That was not that he came out of college with the same pedigree, but that was the same criticism that people had of Rashawn Slater coming out of college. They said, oh yeah, this guy is a great offensive lineman, but his arms are too short to play tackle in the NFL, so they're probably going to have to move him inside to guard when he gets to the NFL. Well, Rashawn Slater stayed at tackle, and he seems to do a pretty darn good job despite his short arms. So I think some of these physical characteristics can be overblown, and you in the end you just have to see what someone's football ability is. And so far, Bo is showing me pretty decent football ability.
Tony, Josh Azudu's on IR. He could be coming back in a couple of weeks. He could be a tackle.
Yeah,
right. The Giants have tried to make him a tackle forever. He could be a tackle, but as Mark Thompson, who's basically having a brain dump today in our comments here, Mark, we see you there having your brain dump and throwing out all kinds of ideas. Mark threw out the idea of moving Jermaine Illuminor into guard and letting Bo play right tackle. And the thing about that is this: Jermaine Illuminor is a very good right tackle. Jermaine Illuminor is a free agent at the end of this season. I have talked to Jermaine Illuminor enough times, and we haven't directly addressed, Jermaine playing guard and all of that. But what I know about Jermaine Illuminor is he was not happy last year about having to go to left tackle. He's done that before in his career, but he was not happy about that at all. That was a last resort for the Giants. If you move Jermaine Illuminor to right guard, I will guarantee you Jermaine Illuminor doesn't even blink twice when he gets to free agency about leaving the Giants. He will bolt the Giants the second he can if you move him to right guard. If you want Jermaine Illuminor to be a long-term part of this football team, and the New York Giants cannot be in the business of letting good offensive linemen walk out the door. If you want Jermaine Illuminor to be part of this football team, you leave him at right tackle. You play Marcus Bowe at guard, for the time being, if you want Bowe in the lineup when the Giants get Andrew Thomas back. And and down the line, when there's an opening at a tackle spot, maybe you slide Marcus Bowe back out to tackle. But if you want Jermaine Illuminor to be part of this football team, you leave him alone.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think they won't touch Illuminor. I hope they won't touch Illuminor. I mean, it'll be interesting to see, even if they do keep Illuminor at right tackle, which I agree with you they should. It'll be interesting to see what happens, because I know Illuminor wants to get paid, and we'll see how much they'd be willing to pay him and whether that would be enough for him to stay next year. I think part of that has to have something to do with whether the Giants look like an up and coming team by the end of the season, a team you'd want to stay on or not. But I'd like to see him stay, because I think, I don't think he's a threat to be an all-pro or anything like that, but I think he's a perfectly capable right tackle. And when you have a capable tackle, then you try to hold on to them, because there aren't all that many of them around, and the consequences of not having one are disastrous for an offense. So yeah, I feel like Bowe's ultimate stop is at guard, and that would be good, because the Giants need guards, right? The Giants don't have a single guard that you really feel like they're part of the future. And by the way, at least briefly, while he's looking pretty good, let's celebrate the fact that the Giants had a 5th-round pick who looks like he could be starting for them right now, and
Absolutely.
on the offensive line. So
Mhm.
thank goodness for that, because they need the help. I'd actually love to see what he would do inside. Can he run block? if he can run block, then maybe get him
We'll
in there
see.
sooner rather than later.
We'll see. All right, Tony, I think that's probably a good place for us to call it a day. We'll see what happens this week against the Kansas City Chiefs, as the Giants try to avoid falling to 0-3. So anyway, Giants fans, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.